We've got 95, 96 people so far.
All right.
Hey, everyone. All right, this is working, at least. We know that. People are here, we're here.
Okay, ready to start?
I think so, yeah. I'm sure people will continue to trickle in, but we're ready to drink some wine, so let's get going.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining the first virtual tasting at Hendry Winery. I know you have a list of upcoming events as well, but today the plan is to talk about the Bordeaux varieties in the Hendry vineyard and how we grow them and how we make wine from them, and why we make the wines we make. But first, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Mike Hendry, and what I do most here is the farming, the vineyard management side of things. Megan Carter is here with us, and also just out of sight but very present is Angela Douglas, who is all of our bosses. Yes. So what I would like to do is cover some of the farming and the viticulture, and a little of our history with these grapes. And then we will talk about how we make the wine. We'll taste very briefly, and then we'll have a chance to answer any questions that you have. This is a learning experience for all of us. And in the event that the question and answer section is a complete flop, we've all enlisted family members to answer or ask questions for us at the right time. But first, Megan is going to tell us a little about this system and how it works and how you can participate.
Well, I imagine that many of you by now have become quite familiar with Zoom. I know I had not used it until this whole quarantine happened, but I feel like I'm almost a pro now. You probably are as well. But we wanted to let you know that we set this up in webinar format. So if any of you over the last week in all of your business meetings or family virtual happy hours have had that moment where 12 people try and talk at once, we're really trying to minimize that. So we've instead enabled at the bottom of your screen a chat function and a Q&A function. So please throw questions in there. We thank you all, everyone who submitted things in advance, and we've got our notes, and we're going to try and cover a lot of those. But please do keep the questions coming and keep the chat going. As Mike said, Angela's here. She's keeping an eye on that. So you have an option in the chat. You can send messages to panelists, which would be us, or to everybody. So feel free to chat amongst yourselves. Remember, Angela's watching, so don't say anything you wouldn't want Angela to read. But we really do want to make this as much of a dialogue as we can, sort of given the technology. So yeah, thank you all very much for your questions, and thank you for all of your outreach over the last couple of weeks. It's been an unusual time for everybody, I think. So we're really, really grateful for this wonderful community, and we're excited to taste with you. As Mike said, we will taste briefly here, but don't wait for us. Please pour whatever you've got right now. We would love to hear what you are drinking. Hopefully a red blend or a Hendry red of some kind, but please put that in the chat as well. We'd love to hear it. So without any further ado, let's jump in.
Great. So yes, and I guess one of the good things about this is that we're all at home.
Yeah.
So
we're comfortable.
Have an extra glass if that helps. So what Bordeaux varieties mean for us really is Merlot, Malbec, Petit Verdot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Cabernet Franc. And as you know, everything we bottle at the Hendry Winery comes from grapes that we grow in our estate vineyard here. And Petit Verdot, Merlot, Malbec, and Cabernet Franc are not grapes that we grow a lot of. We have a few acres of each. We have a lot more Cabernet Sauvignon, but each of these grapes, the Bordeaux grapes, has its own personality, and they're all very important in the blend that we make. I don't know if you're able to see this, but I think everyone here at some point has seen this wine. This is where most of the Bordeaux grapes that we pick. But in Napa, prior to 1990, there was almost no Petit Verdot or Malbec. In 1995, there were just 40 acres of Malbec here, and that's the year where we planted our first and only Malbec Black. We got cuttings at that time from the Opus One winery, and it was a variety of Malbec that was very difficult to grow. And for 15 years, I when anyone asked me what my biggest vineyard headache was, I said Malbec. And one of the problems with it was that it was very unpredictable in terms of how much fruit it produced. So from this 3-acre block, there were years where we had 1.5 tons of Malbec, and there were years where we had 12 tons. And obviously that had a lot to do with the variation in some of the percentages of the Bordeaux blend over the years. We only have a little less than 2 acres of Merlot, and that's actually in 3 different clones. We don't make those clones separately. But I suppose they each contribute something to the wine that we make. Merlot, as you know, is a famous grape for a good reason. It was one that was, and really still is, very popular in Napa, but all of these grapes that we're talking about, Merlot is the only one that's actually declined in acreage over the last 20 years.
Which is interesting because in Bordeaux, sort of the homeland for all of these grapes, where we take a lot of this inspiration, it is actually the largest percentage of a lot of the acreage over there. So that's the kind of interesting, when you go way back, you see a different story.
Right.
Yeah.
And Petit Bordeaux, also sort of new in Napa starting in the mid-90s. And for us, an important step in the process of growing these grapes and making these wines was when George Hendry, my uncle, bought the property that adjoined us to the south. And that includes maybe 60 acres of vineyard, and it all had to be replanted. It was all grafted to a rootstock that was dying from phylloxera. And in those replantings were the first times that we did some of them were Merlot, Malbec, Petit Bordeaux, and Cabernet Franc. And they were all things that initially George wanted to have as potential blending additions for the Cabernet. And as you know, George has moved more and more toward bottling 100% Cabernet Sauvignon, and that's sort of turned into our style. So we didn't necessarily set out to make a Bordeaux varietal blend, but it became one of the options as we moved more toward 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. So Petit Bordeaux is a very interesting grape, I think. Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Petit Bordeaux all have really a very close and the longest ripening period here at Hendry Vineyard. And for each of those grapes, it takes more or less 130 days from bloom to harvest. Petit Bordeaux can be a very intense, very structured, fantastic standalone wine. I think to this day, one of my favorite wines that we've ever made was a Petit Bordeaux that we made in 2001. It's still a very memorable wine for me, but some of my least favorite wines we've ever made are also Petit Bordeaux. So it goes both of those directions for me. Cabernet Franc, we have about 4 acres of. It's been something that I think for the last several years, Cabernet Franc has been, on average, Napa's most expensive grape. And it's been for that reason, it's been an easy grape to sell. And of the little Cab Franc we have, we've sold a bunch of that. And what have I missed anything? Just Cabernet Sauvignon. We all know Cabernet Sauvignon. So the way that we make this wine, and I talked to George yesterday about his winemaking objective with this, and he would like it to be something that is a little lighter in personality than our Cabernet typically. And I in the past have sort of described that as filling the space between, in our lineup of wines, between the Zinfandels and the Cabernet. It's something that brings some of that sort of expressive fruit that the Zinfandel has, but a little more of the structure and the range that the Cabernet has. I think, in some years we achieved that very well, and in other years less so. Sometimes that red blend is a very intense, very structured kind of wine. As far as the ingredients go, this isn't very helpful to you in a virtual tasting, but I have a sample bottle of each of these wines, and I feel like in terms of tannin structure, really the Malbec and the Merlot separate themselves out as by far the lightest in tannin. In most years, the others are much more structured. The Petit Verdot and the Malbec separate themselves as the darkest and the most intensely colored of these wines. I wanted to try, this is an experiment that I was trying to do without shining the flashlight in the, these are all very darkly colored wines, but if I hold up this Cabernet Franc, you can see the way the light goes through it. If I do the same thing with Petit Verdot, there's hardly any light that gets through there. So, and that's, the Malbec's like that too. So within Napa and also within Bordeaux, Petit Verdot and Malbec are the least frequently used or the least widely planted. And I feel like together they make a very natural base for a Bordeaux blend. I went through and looked at, through the first year we made this Bordeaux varietal blend was 2001. And in every year since then, except 1 year, Malbec and Petit Verdot have been one or both of the biggest ingredients. The Malbec, as I mentioned, it's very dark in color. It's very broad on the palate. I try to describe it as having a lot of weight without being particularly tannic. I don't think that the Malbec on its own is particularly complex. As I mentioned, the Petit Verdot, I think, can have a wonderful complexity and range, but sometimes it's very rough around the edges and can be quite hard to drink on its own. So I think when you use those two as the base for a blend, the Malbec can sort of soften the rougher edges of the Petit Verdot, and the Petit Verdot can add complexity to the Malbec that isn't otherwise there. And when you're done, you have a wine that's guaranteed to turn your teeth black and also be quite tasty. If I had to pick one wine in all of these that I like to drink the most on its own, right now, it would probably be the Merlot. I think, you know, there is a good reason why Merlot is so widely planted and so famous. I think it finds a very nice natural balance in terms of aroma and structure and weight and ageability. But I think in this blend, Merlot is often sort of a softening agent. Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon both contribute a lot of tannic structure. They can both add herbaceous, minty kind of qualities to the blend. But when it all comes together, the red blend is one of my favorite wines that we make every year. So, and that's not to say I love it every year, but I don't say that of any of our wines. But I think it can make it a very, very interesting and worthy wine.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of you had sent in questions about, you know, recognizing, we call these grapes the Bordeaux grapes, so harkening back to France and Bordeaux and asking sort of, you know, the difference between French and American Bordeaux and how we approach it. You know, I think as Mike said, it really has a lot to do with sort of what the goal is for the wine. And George's, you know, goal every year in creating this wine that sort of strikes a nice balance between all of these different elements is really our approach. So, you know, a lot of French Bordeaux are relying on a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. Ours is pretty different, as Mike laid out, which I thought was pretty interesting to learn that there was that kind of historical sort of aspects to how the blend's been created.
So the feedback on the light is that it worked really well. And
okay.
So now that it has worked, everybody was like, oh,
one by one.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I will attempt to, so that Angela just mentioned that the trick with the light was effective. And it was sort of the contrast that to me was the easiest to see, but I'll try this with Cabernet Sauvignon. That gives you an idea. Cabernet Franc, I think probably in this setup, it is the lightest in color. Merlot might be similar in that. And then Malbec, as you can tell, is quite dark, and the Petit Verdot is similar. So Another very important thing that I didn't mention in terms of how this blend is made. So when the blend is made, we sit down and work on something that we like. But another very important and very practical component of the final blend is how much of everything we have. And I mentioned that Malbec in the past has really varied widely in terms of what we have to work with. That problem got a little better 7 or 8 years ago when we grafted that block to a new clone that now is really sort of consistently produced a reasonable amount of Malbec, which has led to two things: less variation in the Malbec concentration in the red blend, and in some years, the Malbec that we bottle as a variety by itself. I think, as most of you know, and in the past, those of you that have been in our wine club for a long time, we do occasionally bottle small amounts of Cabernet Franc, and Merlot, and Petit Verdot. So those are all things that we've done as standalone wines in the past. It's usually in the quantity of 1 to 3 barrels, so it's never a lot. So the factors in the final blend are what we like, but it's also the quantity that's available, the fruit that we're selling, whether or not we're making some standalone varieties, and then again, a wine style with what's available that achieves that sort of differentiation from the Cabernet, certainly.
And we know we've got a lot of Hendry Club members on the call. Many of you will probably remember the blending kits that we did a number of years ago. And we are really delighted to see that we're going to do that again. So 2018, and maybe we might talk a little bit about the 2018 vintage, but from that year, we are able to, bottle, or we will be able to bottle, hasn't happened yet, some single varietal Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, Merlot, Malbec, and then of course we always have our Cab. So we're hoping to do that again and get that out to you within a year or so. It depends on sort of how things develop over the next year. But why do you think we could do that in 2018?
Well, 2018 was a really nice vintage in a lot of ways. It was, yeah. And maybe it seems even nicer because 2017 was less nice, but it was overall a higher crop level year and a very sort of consistent, even summertime and fall temperature that one, produced really nice wine, but two, gave us a little more fruit than we typically have.
Yeah. So we would love to know, from other folks, you guys, some of you have chimed in, we're drinking different vintages of the reds, and that was something that we got a lot of questions about, which was how long would these various wines cellar, and is there an optimum kind of time to be drinking them? Which I think means that we should maybe have a drink here.
I'm gonna we'll get to that, but I feel like we now need to join you in having a glass of wine.
Let's talk a little bit about sort of, first of all, what the current release is tasting like for 2015. So if you've got that, please drink along. If not, drink anyway. And then we can talk maybe a little bit about the component grapes and other vintages, how they might fare over the years.
Great. But we should also toast to you. Thank you for your support and perseverance, in which this is a strange time for all of us. And we look forward to getting through it soon and seeing you back here at the winery. So, cheers.
Tasty stuff.
Yeah.
I think.
So as to the question of ageability, I have in front of me, this is the first vintage of the red blend that we made. And in this case, it was actually 60% Malbec the first time around.
And what year is that?
2001. And that's still a beautiful bottle of wine. One of my favorite bottles of wine, period, right now, is this one, which is the 2004 vintage, which I think is, I think it's a truly world-class bottle of wine right now. So I think all of these wines, to answer your question, it depends what you like in wine and what you're looking for, but certainly all of these wines will maintain a nice, provided you win the cork lottery, that they'll age very well for a long time.
Yeah, and I think we've got David and Joanne Harris on the line. They had asked about 2005. I don't know if that's what you guys are currently drinking. If so, congrats on your patience. some of us would have opened that earlier. Any recollections about 05?
I had a bottle of the 2009 last night for dinner. I haven't had a bottle of the 2005 for a little while, but what I remember about it, I do think that it's more, I think it's similar in structure to the 04. I think it's always had a little more fruit aromatically. This one is a little, it has a little more of the earthy, chocolatey type of notes to it. I remember the 05 as being sort of more expressive in terms of its fruit all the way through its life.
Interesting.
But also very nice.
And are any of these, should we be decanting any of these?
Well, it's funny you ask. I mean, when these wines are younger, and the Malbec to me is a great example of that. This is one of the few wines that I've had where really decanting it for a day can make it much more, I mean, it's a sponge for oxygen, and it can be much more expressive with time and decanting. And I think the red blend, when it's younger, it can definitely benefit from decanting. As it gets older, and the aging of wine, in my opinion, is really about this slow, controlled exposure of the wine to oxygen. And the older wines have had more, and I think for that reason need less oxygen initially. There are a bunch of them in the 2005, the 2006, the 2009 that I had last night that have a reasonable amount of sediment. I think wines that are, maybe there are different types of sediment, or the sorts of sediments that you get from anthocyanins that settle out over time. There are tartrate sediments, and sometimes decanting, is nice for that. But I think as the wines get older, that's less necessary.
All right. And we sort of covered this a little bit, but cellaring, would these cellar well? And I think
yes.
The question is yes.
Yeah, and they I think they all will. There are, I think Cabernet Sauvignon, certainly some of these other Bordeaux varieties as well, are extremely expressive of soil and site and annual variation. So they certainly don't all start out the same, but all of these wines should age well. Some of them start leaner and more tannic. Some of them start as sort of richer, fatter versions of this. And for me, sometimes the very lean and tannic ones, the 2006 was a bit like this for me. 2002 and 3 were as well. I feel like they needed more time to soften and became very nice. So those are ones that certainly benefited from some aging initially. I think some of the other ones can start with a very nice balance and really continue in that balance, although the personality of the wine changes. So what is very important, if you do want to age these, and I recommend that you do, and at least try them that way, they can become, very sort of delicate and soft, and still you get a range of aromas and flavors that you can't get any other way. And whether or not that is better or worse is sort of up to you, but it's, it can be a style of wine that you can't get any other way. But what is very important is that you age them with proper temperature control and humidity. The cork needs to be wet. They need to be, they can't be sitting out in a warm room or in the sun, or they need to be, if you want them to be good 10, 15, 20 years down the road, you need to store them properly.
Yeah, well, that goes for anyone, really. So we had a couple questions about climate and soil. So I'm wondering, Mike, if we can test your knowledge of our vineyard out there, and sort of thinking about where these grapes are planted on the Hendry property. Are there any particular soils that you have in mind when you think about planting these grapes, or?
Sure, and very importantly, and I mentioned before that Petit Verdot, Cabernet Franc, and Cabernet Sauvignon are the three grapes here with the longest ripening periods. They have the longest ripening period because for them, phenolic maturity is very important. If you pick them earlier, they can be much leaner and extremely tannic and really pretty hard to drink. So Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot, they're both grapes that and when we first started planting them, we picked very stressy, very rocky, west-facing slopes. Some of the shallow soils and most difficult soils in the whole vineyard. Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon are both, there are other grapes like this, other Bordeaux varieties like Carmenere that make methoxypyrazines. And methoxypyrazines, it's the same compound that green peppers make. And like the chlorinated anissols that give us protein, it's something that we're very sensitive to. And so Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon tend to produce more of that in cooler, wetter years where you have more vine vigor. They produce more of it early, and then they lose it over time, but the biggest factor in how much there is ultimately is how much that's produced early in the season. So vigorous soils for Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc can be a disaster. I think these methoxypyrazines can be a varietal characteristic and an interesting one, but they can also reach a point where they dominate the wine, and in that case, I think that's more of a flaw. So avoiding vigorous soils and more vigorous soil sites, which is not typically, with a few small exceptions, that's not a problem that we normally suffer from here. But we also, within Cabernet Sauvignon, we have a range of soil sites and vine vigors where we use Cabernet Sauvignon, and in some years, we prefer the Cabernet from some sites, and other years and other sites. And that's one of the reasons why, if you look at the back of one of our Cabernet bottles, it lists a number of blocks that may or may not be included. So which Cabernet we like the most can also be year dependent, and also, because of the soil.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is important. Merlot to a lesser degree is sensitive to vine vigor, and Malbec. I mean, we only have it in one block, so I don't have a huge range of experience with Malbec, but I feel like it tolerates a little more soil moisture and vine vigor. Certainly the flavor profile consequences are not the same.
It always seems when you're walking through the vineyard towards the end of the season that it seems obvious when you get to the Malbec because it seems so much more vigorous in some ways than some of the blocks around it. Surrounding it, is that a varietal characteristic, or do you think that's like a part of the soils and the fact that it's not maybe as sensitive to that vigor?
I think it's really a varietal characteristic, and it grows very vigorously early in the year. And Malbec has a very upright growth habit. There's Petit Verdot, for example, is very floppy on the chalices. Malbec wants to go straight up, and it has a lot of lateral shoots that want to go straight up as well. And in fact, its tendency to grow so vigorously around bloom time is one of the prime suspects in why it was so difficult to get consistent fruit set. We have so many growing points that are essentially cycling carbohydrates from the leaves, and not enough is really getting fruit to allow it to set.
Interesting. Again, we had a couple of people asking questions about how what we're doing compares to what they're doing in Bordeaux, and the fact that Bordeaux's are always these blends. It's something you had mentioned earlier about the long growing season that some of these grapes experience, and I think over there they are not blessed with the Napa sunshine quite as much as we are here. It's more humid. There's a big river and an estuary, and I think some years are pretty terrible weather-wise. And so that's sort of been my understanding about, one of the reasons they have blended historically is that, there were some years where they could grow really great Merlot and the cap was terrible, or vice versa. Have you noticed, our blend does change year to year. Someone had asked about that. It does. It's not always the same, though we do see some similarities in terms of the components, but it does change year to year. Do you think that our blend is as maybe weather sensitive or weather dependent year to year?
So I'm not a Bordeaux expert, and I don't claim to be, but I do know that, I mean, one of the very important things about this growing region is that our annual variation has more to do with colder, warmer, and during the growing season and less to do with rain. I mean, we're having a very interesting year right now. We'll probably wind up this year with something like half of our annual average rainfall. Last year, we had almost twice of our average annual rainfall. So we do have a lot of variation in rainfall, but most of that rainfall comes in the winter. If you combine the growing season months of June, July, August, and September, which, you know, those are the summer months, on average, we get about 3/8 of an inch of rain, so it doesn't rain much. I do know that Bordeaux, on average, gets closer to 6 inches of rain in that same period. And some years they might have a lot more. So if you have great varieties that are very sensitive to soil moisture and vine vigor, then obviously you'll have some other issues to deal with in that case. But I think the fact that, you know, some of these grapes are so expressive of that variation is what makes them interesting. So I do think, you know, that the later ripening grapes here for us, when we have a late season, we pick into really to late October. It doesn't feel very warm in late October. There's not a lot of heat to ripen things anymore. There's really very little sunshine on the north sides of the vine. You know, it feels like that's about all the ripening time we have. In an earlier year, we're picking in early September, which can be some of the hottest weather of the year. So Cabernet, because it's so late, Petit Verdot and Cabernet Franc too, when we get into a late year, they can get caught up into a sort of fairly extreme of getting kind of cold and rainy. And in a dry year, they can get caught up in a very hot, dry sort of harvest season. So that length of growing season does tend to magnify some of those differences. And I do think we see more annual variation in these three grapes than we do in any of our others.
The Cab Franc and
Petit Verdot, right?
Those. Interesting. So someone here, oh, hey, so Angela's passing us notes in case you can't see that. We've got our cue cards here. So hi, Kurt. Kurt has asked, he said he's heard that more wineries are leaning more on Merlot these days for blends, whereas maybe they would have used more Cab before. Is there a shift that we're seeing? Do you think more Merlot is being used?
I don't know the answer to that. I think I've said before that, you know, Merlot is a famous grape for a very good reason. And I think that if more people tasted Bordeaux varieties and blind tastings and bought what they liked the most, I think there would be a lot more Merlot. I do think that it's certainly true in Napa, whatever becomes popular in a given decade tends to be what people plant a lot of, and it's the more mediocre vineyard sites that plant to those kinds of grapes. And I think you tend to see, you know, an increase in price and in many cases a decline in quality. There has been, and I think, you know, I don't know how much of this is true. When Merlot was certainly riding a wave of popularity in the 90s, and there were a lot more plantings of Merlot. I can have some numbers for you here. Between 1990 and 1995, Merlot in Napa went from 1,500 acres to 4,200 acres. So it almost tripled in plantings. And then, and everybody blames the movie Sideways. Maybe this is true, maybe it's not. But even if it is true, I think that all of us who enjoy wine and those of us who grow wine should all be embarrassed a little bit by how something so trivial can actually affect what people think about this kind of grape. So there's no doubt that for the last 20 years or so, you know, Cabernet Sauvignon's been the thing here, Merlot hasn't, but I'm expecting people to, rediscover Merlot and remember why they liked it so much. And I do hear more inquiries about Merlot now. And there are supply and demand issues with all of these grapes. And I can sort of tell you again, between, let's see, in 2018, there were 4,300 acres of Merlot. And in 2010, there were 6,200. So it's gone down almost a third. So yeah, good Merlot is fantastic. And I think now that there are, if I'm in a restaurant and I'm looking for a really good bottle of wine for a better price from Napa, I'm usually buying a bottle of Merlot.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say from just a consumption perspective, I feel like we can go to a lot of wineries here. And of course, we can only speak to what we're doing, but in terms of how they're, putting their wines together. But I think you can find a fabulous Merlot for half the price of whatever that winery's cab is. So I do think it's great. But, as Mike said, I think a lot of this, it's, about that year's weather and, what we're trying to achieve with the wine, but some of it comes down to economics as well. So my guess for maybe is that places are relying on it more from a financial perspective, right? You can get some great Merlot for a little less money.
But I think, and this may be changing, but I get in trouble when I say this sometimes, but I feel like one of the things I don't like about Napa now is that you get paid more to produce terrible Cabernet Sauvignon than great Merlot or Zinfandel or something else. And so it is, it's still, the average price of Merlot is probably less than half of the average price of Cabernet Sauvignon. So it is a smaller niche and maybe a less competitive one, but also looking at average grape prices, Merlot has a long way to go right now.
Yeah. Well, that said, there is some great cab out there, and in 3 weeks we're going to be tasting cabs here. So if you want to taste some great cab, tune in late April. We'll be comparing 2 of our cabs. But so back to some other questions. David asks, Mike had mentioned Opus One earlier. Is it true Opus One sources grapes from the Hendry vineyard?
They don't anymore, but for a couple of decades they did. And George still talks about the fact that, and I'm trying to think of where to start there. I think Mondavi's Reserve Cabernet and Opus One are both 2 of the Cabernets, and Opus technically is a Bordeaux varietal blend. But those are 2 of the wines that really put Napa on the map as a place for Cabernet. And I think we played a decent role in the production of those wines for a period of years. So starting in the mid 80s really, and then the last year that we sold the Opus One was 2003. We for a number of years, really all of the production of Black Cabernet, and then in more recent years, some of our new Cabernet plantings went to Opus One and Mondavi as well.
This is a great question. Thank you, Michael. This is about yeast. So this also makes me think that maybe on one of our virtual tastings, we should get Jan in here. She works a lot with that part of the process. But the question is, how much does do yeast varieties affect the grape combinations when we're putting this blend together? Do we experiment with different yeasts?
So, yeah, yeast is a big topic. It's also not one that I consider myself an expert on. I make some wine. I'm not the winemaker for Hendry. I feel like there are yeasts that, well, let me put it this way. I still don't know anybody who can taste a wine and tell me what kind of yeast was used to make it. There are a number of very good studies that look at both the tolerance and the ability of yeast to function under different conditions, as well as produce different aromatics. And this is a big topic in beer as well. And there are, I'm not a beer expert either, but I think there are some very distinctive yeast strains that are used in beer. I think for us, from a winemaking standpoint, one of the fundamentals when it comes to choosing a yeast is choosing one that we know will finish the fermentation. In some of the experimentation we've done with yeast over the years, we've run into problems having the fermentation finish, which is always a harvest time nightmare. But we do use different yeasts in our white wines. We use a different yeast for the rosé, and for most of our red wines, we use a strain of PDM.
Which is
EC1118 is the brand that we buy. So in that, technically it's a champagne yeast, but it's used in everything. It's used in a lot of very nice Chardonnays. It's used in the reds. It's a very hardy, tolerant strain of yeast. So there are people I know that experiment more with yeast than we do. We use a number of different ones, but we're not. We're I think more. Well, yeah, that's basically the way we do it.
So if that's of interest, we can have a whole session. We can get Jan in here to talk all about yeast. So I think we've covered a lot of the questions that folks had about these particular grapes and our blending process and how we grow them. One question people, of course, always have is, what would you pair with these wines? Angela put a little teaser question in there if down in the chat. If you've done George's tasting before, you probably heard him say that this is his pot roast wine.
Courtney Reynolds.
Courtney Reynolds. Yeah, but I could see lots of other suggestions coming in. So maybe we'll go through, because now I'm getting hungry. Someone's talking about butterfly leg of lamb. That sounds delicious.
Yeah.
That might actually quite a grill master. That would be something that you could I think do quite well. But maybe we'll take some of these suggestions.
And my father-in-law raises lamb, so
a source.
Yes, yeah.
A source.
I have a lamb.
It's the Hendry Ranch is not a terrible place to be quarantined, as you're figuring out. But maybe we'll take some of those suggestions. People are talking about mushroom risotto and things like that, and throw them up onto Facebook and Instagram, and we can have a long list of things to cook during this quarantine. So, is there anything in particular, Mike, that you enjoy cooking when you're serving red?
I mean, I like the red with a lot of things. It is a wine with a lot of. It has a lot of structure, a lot of intensity, a lot of flavor. It's not a wine that pairs very well with very delicate food. But beyond that, I mean, it's really good with pizza. It's really good with lamb and beef.
Short ribs, that's a good one.
Short ribs is a great one.
Yeah.
I like block 28 with short ribs.
Block 28. So tune in
But
next week.
good with short ribs.
We're all gonna be very hungry after this. Good thing it's getting to be dinner time. But yeah, next week, as I've previewed, we will talk about the block 28 and the block 7 and 22 Zinfandel. So many of you know that Vin is near and dear to our hearts here, and we'll talk about that. Got some funny comments.
Many people wish they were quarantined with us, you guys.
We wish you were quarantined with
Yeah.
us. We're missing all of you. So so please do keep the comments and the questions coming. We've sent out that list of tastings that we're going to do every Friday. So this time, mark the calendar every week. We're going to do these tastings. We've got them set up through Friday, May 1st. We'll continue them if people find them interesting. If you have other topics that you want to tackle or questions for us, please let us know.
I have a question for you.
Oh,
Do you think we should open this bottle of one?
I think we should. I mean, it would. I feel like we wouldn't be really doing our job if we couldn't tell you exactly how this is tasting right now. So.
And is it okay if we open this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You always have to get Anne's approval for things, right? Who's really running the show. So, yeah, so we'll taste this, let you know what it's like. We'll get some extra glasses here. So yeah, next week we're going to do Zinfandel. We're going to do a cab comparison, as I mentioned. Mike talked a little bit about climate. And in fact, we've got a question here that, if it's okay with the viewer, I'm going to hold off on this question about climate, Oak Knoll and Lower Mount Peter, where we are, versus Up Valley, because we can tackle that, I think, in a couple weeks when we talk about climate. It's a big topic. I know Mike has some thoughts.
I mean, I can try.
I get a little preview, and then
I think Megan's worried that I'll use up all my ammunition for that particular talk, but so that I think the perception is that when it comes to growing grapes, in the southern end of the valley, it's freezing cold, and in the northern end of the valley, it's scorching hot. And in truth, it is more complicated than that. I think, you know, Oak Knoll, Coombsville, it sort of spans a latitude in the valley. And one of the important things about that latitude that you can see a reflection of the climate in the varieties of grapes that are grown there. And those growing regions are more diverse in terms of their varieties than what you see either north or south. But I also think, and I will talk more about this in another virtual tasting, but I do think that it gets more complicated even within regions, and some of the regions that are often assumed to be cold aren't necessarily like that, and some of the ones that are warmer aren't certainly like that in every year. So
Right.
it is, I mean, if I hope you join us for that one, and I will use up all my ammunition there.
Yeah, and we'll like share charts and graphs and get real geeky in advance of that. Should be kind of fun. So as we were sort of doing research for this, you know, one interesting tidbit that we learned, you know, last year, I believe last summer, the governing body in Bordeaux, where again we're, you know, all of these grapes working from, approved 7 new varieties, 4 of which are red, that can now go into the official Bordeaux wines there, and they were largely planned to. They're permitting that because they're seeing changes sort of overall in climate, and they're looking at temperatures and worried about climate change and all of that. So that was kind of an interesting little, another aspect of this is there are certainly variations year to year, but then some trends as well. So.
Yeah, and I feel like historically there have been a number of varieties in Bordeaux that aren't necessarily called Bordeaux varieties anymore. So, you know, Carmenere is an obvious one, but Mortal, which is also goes by Cabernet Pepper historically in California, is apparently an old Bordeaux variety as well. And so I don't know enough to
Yeah.
talk.
But I think it's just interesting. I mean, climate, it's a big subject, right? And I think there's a lot we can discuss with that. But yeah, I'd be curious in the chat if anyone's ever heard previously of Cabernet Pepper. That's a new one for us.
So this, I think it's super good. It's the color is there's a little bit of a brickish tinge. I mean, it's now 19 years old. You know, I think the fruit is moderated somewhat, but there's almost a little brown sugar milk to me, and some sort of baking spice kind of stuff. There's still some darker berry fruit, I think, but it's very soft. It has a very sort of delicate texture. It's beautiful.
So yeah, the fruit is actually still remarkably present. I think, you know, I think something everyone expects that to sort of diminish as the wine ages. But this is pretty darn good. So if you've got one of those older reds, don't hesitate to open it.
Or send it back to us if we'd like them to.
Yeah, if you just can't bring yourself to do it. I don't know who that would be, but we'll happily take one for the team. Ange, any other questions, burning questions that are coming in?
So since he's not here, a lot of people are asking about George. And how's George doing today?
George is doing great. He's I don't know if he's enjoying the quiet days at the winery, but we see him walking around the vineyard a lot. He often has, it's not really his dog, but it's sort of his dog, but he has a small dog, Gracie, in tow. And the weather, you know, we would like more rain, but the weather has been beautiful for walking around the vineyard with the dog. So George is doing very well.
Yes, and we want to be responsible and follow all of the sort of social distancing rules, but we will find a way to, share maybe a day in the life of George or something like that with you all. And, we are doing as best we can. We're trying to become a 21st century winery here in terms of our the tools we're using. So we're starting to do more on social media. If it feels new to you, don't worry, it feels new to us too. So bear with us. But we hope to be sharing.
I don't think we'd be doing any of this without Megan.
And Angela, Therese, and Tamara. It's been a real team effort here. So, but do follow us along there, because our hope is that we can use that to share some materials in advance of these tasting, but also kind of give you a little insight. Mike can speak to this a a little bit. It's a really busy time here in the vineyard. So while it's quiet here in the tasting room, there's a lot happening out there. So it would be really fun, I think, to sort of show that to everybody. And if there are particular things you're interested in learning or seeing, please do send questions our way. We would love to try and answer them as best we can.
Can we shine some light through that 01 red?
Yeah.
Possible. It's got a label on it, so yeah.
Well, let me.
I feel like everyone.
This is going to require a full glass.
Oh, darn. I feel like everyone now is going to be walking around at home with a flashlight in their left.
So here's what we're going to do. This will be a little more difficult, but let's see. Can you see that? Is it working?
A little bit.
No, I
There
see
we
that
go.
hurts. So still, I don't know how well you can see that. Let me try the next one.
Which one was that?
That was the 01. This is the, I don't know if you can,
It's a little tricky.
maybe your screen's better than ours, but it wasn't, it certainly wasn't obvious, the difference there. The color is still great though in the 01.
Yeah. You see a little bit of that slightly brown tint to it, but it's not faded dramatically at all. Other questions, Ange?
No, I'll blast it.
Yeah, as I said, oh darn,
Yeah.
we're gonna have to drink that. But well, this seems like a good place to sort of wrap it up. As I said, we tried to get to as many questions as we can, but we do have a log of all of this, and so if there's something that we didn't get to, we'll try and address it either on social media or in another tasting. So thank you again. I mean, I Mike mentioned this at the beginning, but on behalf of Angela, who's been amazing the last 2 weeks, you know, she's carrying a lot right now for all of us over here at the winery. We've been really touched by all of the calls and emails, you know, asking how we're doing and the orders. You know, we've known that we've had a wonderful wine club for a long time, and you guys are just proving that yet again, and all of our fans. So we feel very fortunate in this moment. We're thinking of everyone, and we're glad to be in this age with all this technology to beam us into your living rooms. So please do come back and visit us, and keep the questions coming, keep the love coming, and we're looking forward to seeing you again.
We appreciate it, you guys. And if you can think of ways or topics or things to improve, please let us know. If you know, we have a week till the next one. If you think of a good question sometime between now and then, you know,
Yeah.
email it to the
Megan
winery
at
and
henrywines.com.
Megan at henrywines.com, and we'll do our best to answer it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. Bye.